It's hard to turn down any of your invitations, Councilman Christensen. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. Mike Butler, Public Safety Chief. So, the incident with the Longmont Housing Association and the searches that took place. When I found out about what was going on through a letter that was written by the Longmont Housing Association staff, I immediately put a stop to it. This is not something that we've done, and it's not something we're going to be doing in the future. There were some things that came up after I found out about that in terms of the acts themselves, and I know that there is an ongoing third-party investigation that's being conducted, and we're going to have to wait for that investigation to be completed before we know all of the information and all of the facts. So I'm not going to speculate on any of that at this point. However, I will talk about the intention of the officers in terms of going in to the suites, and their intentions were very much aligned with our philosophical culture, our practices, our policies. Over the last few years, you may know, we've been in front of you before and we've spoken about it. We are using our criminal justice system less and less to try to solve social and health issues in our community. And we realize that the invoking of our criminal justice system often just disenfranchises and marginalizes people even more. If they are suffering with an addiction, or if they're suffering with a mental health issue, or another kind of health issue where there's some criminal laws or ordinances that pertain to that, we have developed other ways of doing business within public safety in order to deal with those. You may or may not be familiar with the EDGE program. The EDGE program is a program in which we have mental health service providers who actually work out of public safety, and when our staff goes on a mental health call or call potentially involving someone's mental health, we do have an EDGE, a trained mental health service provider, respond as well to those incidents. And the goal of that response is to ensure that if we can transfer or move into the mental health system versus the criminal justice system a person who potentially is struggling with their mental or emotional health and has committed a crime, that we would, in fact, defer them to the mental health system. You're all familiar with restorative justice. It's been around for a long time. Longmont Public Safety has referred over 4,500 people who have committed crimes to the restorative justice process. And in our minds, it's a significant reason why our community is as safe as it is, because the recidivism rates coming out of restorative justice are so low. And then we recently implemented our Angel Initiative that started January 1st of this year. And we've had numerous people walk through our doors, say that they want treatment, and I'm happy to say that we've been able to find everybody treatment. And so when our officers went in to the suites, they went in a mode. They were very clear with the Longmont Housing Association that they weren't going to be there in an enforcement role. They were going to be there as police officers, but in a role in which if they encountered people who were struggling with potential addiction, that they would make referrals to the Angel Initiative, and we know that that happened. What I can't sit here and do is make excuses for what happened in terms of how that played out. We are going to examine and analyze what we could do differently with these circumstances in the future. This is something we have to figure out because, frankly, from what we heard and from what we know, there are some issues with illicit narcotics at the suites. There are stories and indications of use sales, and on April 2nd of this year, someone died of a heroin overdose. So the management there was concerned, and they called us, and we did what we did. But in the future, we're going to be doing things differently in terms of how that plays out. I also want to say that In the past, maybe in the distant past, when we get intelligence related to illicit narcotic sales especially, that it's not unusual, what wouldn't have been unusual, and it's not unusual now for a lot of police departments to basically do an undercover sting kind of operation and to try to gather intelligence and information so that we could identify people who were distributing and selling drugs. In our minds, drug sellers, they prey on the vulnerabilities of others, and the vulnerability is an addiction. And so that's something that we're going to sustain in terms of how we do business, but very much focused on large distribution organizations. Recently, we did have an Operation Stiletto, in which we've arrested I think we have arrest warrants and indictments for 35 to 40 people, all selling large amounts of illicit narcotics. So, if we have operated that way, I just want you all to know, and I certainly want the community to know, that we probably could have developed information for a criminal case, maybe in a number of instances, and potentially arrested people for either possession and or distribution of narcotics. And for those of us who know about these things, we know that if someone is arrested for possession of a narcotic, that's a felony. Of an illicit narcotic, that's a felony. And I don't know for sure because I don't know the housing authority's rules, but it wouldn't be unusual in a crime-free family multi-housing facility, which the suites are, for those folks to be evicted. And if they're evicted, frankly, this is one of their last chances for housing. And if they're evicted and potentially convicted of a crime, their capacity to gain gainful employment becomes pretty close to zero in our community. So that's one of the reasons why we've changed our philosophy. And it's one of the reasons why we're trying to figure out how we can deal with especially folks who are just possessing and using drugs differently, because we don't want to further disenfranchise and marginalize them. We don't want them not to have a viable opportunity to find gainful employment and to live in this community in a way that, that helps them and that they can live a more healthy life. That's why we have the Angel Initiative. And just to let you all know again, we're probably up to 75 addiction treatment service providers that are willing to help, and we've already, we think, put in place assets of close to $300,000 to $350,000 of addiction treatment in our community. So I don't want this to sound like an excuse for anything. I just want you to know why our officers at some level went in the way they did. And it's not going to happen again in the future. So I think that's more or less the statement I wanted to make. I will say, I know there's been quite a bit of finger pointing. And as these kinds of things happen, that's what happens. There's a lot of people who want to assign blame. They want to find fault. And maybe in certain instances, certain institutions want to market fear. And that's understandable at some level, but I think the bigger picture here for us in this whole deal is, what do we do with folks who are struggling with addiction, wherever they're at, whether they're in the suites or wherever they're at. And I'm hoping soon we can get to a point where that becomes more the issue. Albeit I understand that we're at where we're at. We'll let the investigation play out, and we'll see where that all goes. And we will take stock at that point. So I am open for questions if you have any. Otherwise, thank you for the invitation. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.